Today's story is about a woman named Marybeth Tinning. I hadn't even heard of this person until a couple of days ago. In this story, we're going to be going up to Schenectady, which is in upstate New York, and it's actually close to where I'm from, in the small town of Scotia. This woman had 9 children, or babies rather, who all died under mysterious circumstances. And they didn't die all at once, like in the case of Andrea Yates, where she drowned all of her kids in her bathtub one by one. In this case, the babies would die over a 14-year period, and the ages of the deceased would range from 8 days to 4 years, many of which would die under 6 months old. But nothing was done until the 9th child had died. You might ask, how could this be? How did this go on for so long? Why didn't anyone do anything to stop her? All of which are very good questions. Well, let's see if we can dive in and see what happened there. Marybeth Rowe was born on September 11, 1942, to Ruth and Alton Lewis Rowe in Duanesburg, New York. Alton fought alongside the Allies in World War II, while Mother Ruth was forced to earn for the family. Marybeth had a younger brother, who she felt was loved and wanted by her parents. She did not feel that they showed her the same love and attention, though. After serving, Marybeth's father took a job as a press operator at General Electric. It's a little fuzzy of the relationship between the father and the daughter. Years later, Marybeth would claim that her father had abused her by beating her and locking her in a closet, and sometimes hitting her with a fly swatter. But she would go on to defend his actions, saying that he didn't have bad intentions. Her high school life was very uneventful. She was an average student that just got through school and graduated, but there were no real academic achievements or honor roll awards. For work, Marybeth barely got by, having little to no skills. Her most notable job was as a nursing assistant at Ellis Hospital in Schenectady. At the age of 20, Marybeth had been set up with a man named Joseph Tinning on a blind date. Joseph was very quiet and timid and pretty passive. I guess you could say that he was kind of a beta male, while Marybeth was seen as more of a dominant personality. Joseph was very neat and a hard worker. He would go on to have a long career at GE, where he would be a manufacturing supervisor and evaluator. 2 years after dating, they would tie the knot, and 2 years after that, their first child Barbara would be born in May of 1967. She was followed by Joe Jr. in January of 1970. Everything seemed to be going great with their first 2 children. It wouldn't be until child number 3, Jennifer, would come along where everything seemed to spiral downhill. In October 1971, Marybeth's father died unexpectedly of a heart attack. It is not really said how she reacted to this news. Just 2 months later, Jennifer would be born, but not for very long. Jennifer never even left St. Clair's Hospital where she was delivered. After 8 days, she had succumbed to brain abscess and meningitis that had developed in the womb. This was the only death that was never looked at as suspicious or investigated, even to this day. It has been theorized that Marybeth had a case of Munchausen by proxy, and that she was so satisfied with all the attention she got after her newborn's death that she wanted more of it. This is, however, just a theory, and there has been no proof that she was ever diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. Just 1 month later, the first of many suspicious deaths was about to occur. When a medical examiner cannot find a definitive cause of death, they will usually attribute the cause to sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, whereas the baby had appeared in good health in all aspects but then perished due to natural causes. SIDS was used all too often in her baby's cases. But 2 cases of SIDS of the same mother was unfathomable. 3 or more cases of SIDS was virtually impossible. Joseph Tinning Jr. was brought to St. Ellis Hospital on January 20th, 1972. There was nothing anyone could do for him at that time. He was already dead. Marybeth claims that he had been suffering from seizures. No autopsy was ever performed, and they took Marybeth at her word about him having the seizures. The cause of death was reported as viral and a seizure disorder. On March 2nd, Marybeth's last remaining child at the time, Barbara, then 4 years old, also had died. Barbara, it turns out, would be the oldest living child of Marybeth in her whole history. Within a span of a little over 2 months, 3 of her children had died. An autopsy was ordered in this last case, but the death was still undeterminable. Once again, Marybeth said that her child had suffered from seizures. Marybeth's own husband, Joe, couldn't even back this claim up, though. Joe never seemed to be around when these awful deaths occurred, and he had never responded as if this was a terrible tragedy. It's like he would shrug his shoulders and say, I guess it was God's will. On a hunch, medical examiner Thomas Oram thought that the child was suffering from Rye disease, so that's what he went with, listing the cause of death as cardiac arrest. Neighbors were beginning to talk at this point. This was highly unusual. Some that did not suspect foul play thought that the Tinnings had a death gene, that this was so tragic and just incredibly unfortunate. They felt really bad for the kids and the parents. Marybeth didn't socialize with a lot of people in the neighborhood, but neighbors would see her outside playing with her kids, keeping them dressed and well fed. There were no outward signs of abuse. Of course, there were others who suspected the worst. 3 deaths in 2 months. Something had to be going on, right? But they didn't know how to talk about it, or they didn't know who to talk about it to. At least that's what some of them claimed. It's definitely a touchy subject and a pretty serious accusation that a mother killed her own babies. Police had also gotten wind about the deaths of the children, but they felt that their hands were tied because there was no cause of death that said it was foul play in any way. Now at this point, the Tinnings were out of children, but it wouldn't be long before Marybeth started to pop out some more. Their 4th child, Timothy, got to live for only 2 weeks before Marybeth brought him back to Ellis Hospital. He was barely clinging to life before he took his last breath. When a cause of death could not be determined, it was written off as SIDS. For some unknown reason, no autopsy was ever performed, and it wasn't enough to just kill children for Marybeth, it seemed. It would appear that Marybeth also wanted her husband Joe dead as well. In 1974, Joseph was rushed to the hospital and was found to have been poisoned with barbiturates. Marybeth had an epileptic friend and had taken some of her friend's medication to use against her husband. She slipped it into his grape juice when he wasn't looking. Joseph made a full recovery and the police wanted to press charges against Marybeth for attempted murder. But Joseph, being the nice, quiet punching bag that he was, didn't want to go along with it. But wow. You'd think he'd at least want to get away from her. She failed the one time, but who's to say when she's going to try to poison you again? Police had suspected that Marybeth was having an affair behind Joe's back and just wanted to be rid of him. But in the end, they ended up staying together, and not too surprisingly, they started to have more children. Their next child was a little boy named Nathan, who only lived to be 5 months old when he died of acute pulmonary edema in 1975 per an autopsy report. Mary Frances was only 3.5 months old when she departed from the world. Her death was undetermined, so SIDS was listed as the cause. 3-month-old Jonathan's death was also undetermined in 1980, and still, no charges were filed against Marybeth and no investigation was ever done. If anyone was still in doubt that Marybeth was killing babies, all they had to do was look at the next victim. Michael Raymond died at the age of 3 in 1981, but the kicker was that he wasn't Marybeth's biological son. He was actually adopted by the Tinnings, so it couldn't have been a death gene that killed him. I don't know who in their right mind would think it was a good idea that this woman be able to adopt a child, but it is said that this was a private adoption that involved a single unwed mother. Social services came to St. Clair's to investigate the treatment of Michael Raymond, and no abuse was ever detected. Although it did come out that Michael had fallen down a flight of stairs just 2 weeks prior to his death. Bronchial pneumonia was listed as the cause of death in his case. It seemed to many that Marybeth had gotten away with murder for over a decade now, but her luck would finally run out after her 9th child was born. But this wouldn't happen for another 4 years. On December 20th, 1985, Tammy Lynn Tinning, the final child of Marybeth, was found unconscious in her bed. A small amount of blood was found in her crib. She was pronounced dead at St. Clair's Hospital. The medical examiner and the police were ready to pounce on this investigation to find something incriminating against Marybeth. While at first it was hard to find any sign of abuse that contributed to the infant's death, it was soon determined that the baby was smothered with a soft object, either a pillow or a cushion. Marybeth was brought in for questioning. She would later claim that the detectives were mean and intimidating during the interview with her, and that they got right up in her face, throwing their formidable weight around. She says she kept asking when she could speak to a lawyer, until one of the detectives snapped and said, "We'll give you a goddamn lawyer when we're goddamn ready to." Also, she said the detectives threatened to dig up her kids to cut them open to do autopsies. This was actually somewhat true because the kids were eventually exhumed. In the end, 3 bodies ended up being exhumed, but in one of the cases, tragically, the wrong corpse had been dug up. Jesus. So they couldn't do an examination on that one, obviously, and the other 2 were so badly decomposed that a conclusive examination could not be established. And I mean, it was such a cluster, this whole ordeal. And part of the problem was the lack of communication between the medical examiners and the doctors who handled the baby's deaths that were not autopsied. But one medical examiner admits that he thought of doing more, but he just didn't do more than he was required to do. But anyhow, back to the interrogation. The detectives, however, had a very different take on what happened during the interrogation. Marybeth was anxious and just ready to tell them what happened. She just wanted to get through the whole process and be done with it. An old friend of Marybeth's named Detective William Barnes went and saw her and tried to get her to open up about what happened. He had actually known the woman since she was only 10 years old. She looked at the detective as someone she could trust, and within 4 minutes, Marybeth was ready to start talking. Marybeth told him that she was a bad mother, that her babies cried all the time, and that she was to blame. She said good mothers didn't have babies that cried and wailed that much. She ended up confessing to smothering Tammy Lynn with a pillow. In Marybeth's statement, she said she kept trying to get Tammy Lynn to stop crying but was unsuccessful. She said in her own words, "I finally used the pillow from my bed and put it over her head. I held it until she stopped crying. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to stop crying. Joe was still sound asleep and didn't know I came in and got the pillow. When I finally lifted the pillow off Tammy, she wasn't moving." Marybeth then screamed for Joe to call 911. After this confession, she confessed to smothering 2 of her other children as well. She says that she had smothered Timothy in his crib because he was making funny noises. The 3rd murder she admitted to was her infant baby Nathan. She had stifled his cries in her car by putting a pillow over his face while she was driving. She pulled into an ice cream shop for help afterwards, but it proved to be too late. She said despite these admissions, she never hurt any of her other 6 children. She later took back these confessions, saying that these were false confessions and that she had been coerced. On February 4th, 1986, Marybeth was arrested for the murder of Tammy Lynn. She was not charged and has never been charged for the deaths of any of her other children. Defense attorney Paul Callahan tried to get the confessions from being admitted into evidence, but his efforts were in vain. During the trial, it was presented by pediatrician Dr. Bradley Ford that Marybeth was strongly advised to use a SIDS device that would monitor the baby's breathing and heart rate before Tammy Lynn had died. Marybeth refused to use this monitor on the baby. 2 doctors on the prosecution side testified that they believed that the baby was smothered with a pillow or a cushion. Defense attorney Callahan tried to show that Tammy Lynn died of a rare genetic disorder known as Wernicke-Hoffman disease, which was a disorder affiliated with Lou Gehrig's disease. This was presented at trial to no avail. The evidence against Marybeth was overwhelming, especially with the confession. On July 17, 1987, 44-year-old Marybeth Tinning was convicted of second-degree murder of 17-week-old Tammy Lynn. The jury deliberated for 19 hours over 3 days and determined that Marybeth was not guilty of intent, but was guilty of acting recklessly with a depraved indifference to human life. The penalty could range from 15 or 25 years to life. The judge came halfway and set the sentence at 20 years to life for the offender. District Attorney John Porsche vowed to file charges for the other children's deaths. A grand jury was indicted but was disbanded after a year, and no new charges ever came to fruition. Marybeth was first up for parole in 2007, where she was quickly denied. From then on, she would be up in front of the parole board every 2 years. The reason she would be denied was that she wouldn't take full responsibility of her actions, and she would show little remorse, if any. She would act like she had no recollection of doing it, but she still admitted that she knew she must have done it. and she had to live with that. The members of the parole board were not impressed at all. They reminded her that this was a living person that she had taken the life from, and that she couldn't fully appreciate what she had done and the severity and the effects of her actions. Marybeth would admit to smothering her daughter with a pillow, but she claimed the other children had died of complications. She said that she had expedited her baby's death because she felt it was inevitable. Marybeth said her husband Joe was gone for long periods of time, and that she didn't have any help or support with the baby from her family and from her in-laws. The transcripts of the parole reports are actually online, so I'm kind of summarizing a lot here. By 2017, she had been rejected 6 times for parole. By August of 2018, she was granted parole on her 7th attempt at the age of 75 after serving 31 years, and now a convicted infant killer would be set free. Many would ask how this could happen, that this woman was a depraved evil monster. In this meeting with the parole board, she seemed to have shown some remorse. She said that she had struggled for years to understand why she did what she did to her 4-month-old baby girl. She said, "I want you to know that you will never know how sick my heart is, how empty I feel for what I've done. That's all I can say." Abby Smith, the director of the Georgetown program that approved her release, said, "Whatever happened in her life that precipitated the crime she was convicted of for, she is a different person now. That is the thing about such a lengthy incarceration. The parole board looks at her as a low risk to offend, and that she is a nice, humble person." Okay. They don't believe that she would dare break any rule related to her parole to land her back in prison. On a side note, from what I could tell from the transcripts, she never took full responsibility for any of the other babies' deaths, and her husband Joe waited for her, and they are actually still together. Marybeth Tinning will be under supervision for the rest of her life. As of February 2023, she is 82 years old. She is living in the county of Schenectady and laying low. Her and husband Joe are living in the same house they were living in before her incarceration, supposedly. And this is Joe Tinning, the same person that she tried to kill with poison and even admitted to during her trial. But I mean, it's crazy that nobody figured this out, that this person was killing babies. I mean, even one of the medical examiners said that he was pretty certain that she was doing it, but he didn't take the time to actually dig and find the cause of death. You know, he just attributed it to something else. So it's kind of crazy that the people that were in charge kind of dropped the ball on this one. But, you know, if you want to know my thoughts, I think she basically got away with murder. I think that she killed at least as little as 3 of her babies and likely as many as 8. From my understanding of what I've read, I think she just couldn't deal with the loud crying. You know, some parents will go to the extreme of shaking their defenseless baby, and you know, she basically did the same thing, but instead of shaking it, she put a pillow over their head. So, you know, it's kind of scary and messed up, especially now that she's walking around in society. But that's the story for today. You know, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. This woman who may have serial killed 8 babies is now loose in society. I'm actually surprised that the folks of Schenectady didn't put a petition together to deny her release into their community. But I mean, maybe they did. Maybe I just, you know, hadn't read it anywhere. But that's it, and I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in, and God bless.